I was holding my newborn son for the first time when Derek's phone lit up beside my hospital bed. The message preview made my blood freeze. Can't wait until she's out of the picture permanently. Then we can finally be together. The sender, Vanessa Cole, his supposed business client, in that moment, cradling my 3-hour-old baby while still recovering from major surgery, I realized my entire marriage had been built on lies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The epidural was wearing off as I watched Derek pace the hallway outside my recovery room at Millbrook General Medical Center. He was on another phone call, the third one since our son Ethan had arrived just hours earlier. Through the glass door, I could see him gesturing animatedly, his voice rising and falling in heated conversation. The nurses kept glancing his way with disapproving looks, but Derek seemed oblivious to their silent criticism. "Congratulations, Miss Pemberton," Nurse Linda Chang said softly as she checked my vitals. "He's absolutely beautiful. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and those eyes are definitely going to break some hearts someday." She smiled warmly at baby Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully in my arms, completely unaware that his father had barely glanced at him since the delivery. I tried to smile back, but exhaustion weighed heavily on my shoulders. The C-section had been unexpected after 18 hours of difficult labor, and my body felt like it had been split in half. Derek had been supportive during the surgery, holding my hand and whispering reassurances, but the moment Ethan was safely delivered, his attention seemed to drift elsewhere. Phone calls became more important than skin-to-skin contact with his newborn son. "Is he always this busy with work?" Linda asked gently, nodding toward Derek through the window. Her tone was carefully neutral, but I caught the underlying concern. "Real estate never sleeps," I replied automatically, repeating Derek's favorite excuse. "Big deal. Closing this week." The words felt hollow as they left my mouth. Every milestone in our relationship had been overshadowed by some urgent business matter. Our wedding day, our honeymoon, my pregnancy announcements. Even the baby shower had been interrupted by supposedly critical phone calls from clients or his business partner Marcus. Derek finally ended his call and stepped back into the room, his expression shifting to what I'd learned to recognize as his public face. Concerned husband, devoted father-to-be, successful businessman juggling important responsibility. "Sorry about that, honey," he said, reaching down to briefly touch Ethan's tiny hand. "Marcus needed to discuss the Riverside property. You know how these investors get when they're nervous." I nodded, too tired to question why property investors would be calling at 9 o'clock at night when their new grandson had just been born. Derek's phone buzzed again, and I saw his jaw tighten as he glanced at the screen. "I need to step out for just a minute," he said, already moving toward the door. "This client has been having second thoughts about the downtown purchase. And if we lose this sale..." He was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone with Ethan and the growing realization that even the birth of his first child couldn't compete with Derek's mysterious business obligation. I adjusted my position carefully, wincing as the surgical incision pulled, and gazed down at my son's perfect sleeping face. He had Derek's dark hair but my green eyes, and I wondered what kind of father he would grow up with. The room felt eerily quiet without Derek's constant phone notifications and hurried conversations. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to acknowledge the nagging doubts that had been growing throughout my pregnancy. Derek's late nights had become more frequent, his explanations more elaborate, and his affection toward me more perfunctory. I'd attributed it to stress about becoming a father, about expanding the business, about providing for our growing family. But sitting there in that hospital bed, holding our newborn son while Derek prioritized phone calls over precious first moments, I began to question whether I'd been making excuses for behavior I didn't want to examine too closely. Nurse Linda returned with a warm blanket and a gentle reminder about feeding schedules. "Don't worry about being perfect," she said, noticing my overwhelmed expression. Every new mother feels this way. You'll find your rhythm. She paused, glancing toward the empty doorway. Is your husband coming back soon? We need to discuss some discharge instructions and newborn care basics. He'll be back, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. Derek's business calls had a way of stretching indefinitely. Especially lately, he's just dealing with a difficult client situation. Linda nodded but didn't look convinced. She'd probably seen countless new fathers over the years, and she could likely distinguish between genuine work emergencies and avoidance behavior. Well, when he returns, we'll go over everything together. In the meantime, try to rest. Recovery from a C-section takes time, and you'll need your strength for the weeks ahead. After she left, I found myself studying the framed photo Derek had brought from home. The one from our wedding day 3 years earlier. We looked so happy, so convinced that we were building something lasting and meaningful. Derek's smile in the photo was genuine. His eyes focused entirely on me as we danced at our reception. When had that changed? When had I become an afterthought in his life? My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Claire. How's the new mama doing? Can't wait to meet my nephew. I started to type a response about how perfect Ethan was, how overwhelmed but grateful I felt. But I found myself hesitating. How could I explain that the most important day of my life felt oddly lonely? How could I admit that Derek seemed more interested in his phone than in his newborn son? Instead, I sent back a simple message. Ethan is perfect, still recovering but doing well. Derek is handling some work crisis. Even to my own sister, I couldn't bring myself to voice the growing unease that had taken root in my chest. Derek's phone, which he'd left charging on the bedside table in his hurry to take his call, buzzed repeatedly with incoming messages. The screen lit up each time, displaying previews of texts that I could see from my position in the bed. Most were from Marcus about property listings and client meetings. Exactly what I'd expected, but then a name appeared that made me pause. Vanessa Cole. I'd heard Derek mention Vanessa occasionally over the past few months. She was supposedly a high-end client looking for commercial property, someone with significant investment capital who required personal attention and frequent consultation. Derek had taken several evening meetings with her, weekend calls that couldn't be postponed, and last-minute schedule changes that revolved around her availability. The message preview was brief. Thinking of you during this difficult time. The birth of his son was a difficult time. I stared at the phone screen until it went dark, telling myself I was reading too much into a simple client message. Perhaps she'd heard about the baby and was acknowledging that new parenthood could be challenging. Perhaps she was referring to the stress of balancing new family responsibilities with business obligations. But something about the tone felt wrong, too intimate for a client relationship. In 3 years of marriage, I'd never received messages from Derek's other clients, and he'd never mentioned them requiring emotional support during personal milestones. Real estate transactions were business arrangements, not relationships that warranted personal sympathy during family events. I was still staring at Derek's phone when he returned, his expression slightly flustered. Sorry that took so long, he said, immediately reaching for his phone and slipping it into his pocket without checking his message. The Riverside deal is getting complicated, and Marcus needed me to walk him through some contingency options. Vanessa Cole texted you, I said quietly, watching his reaction carefully. Something about a difficult time. Derek's face remained impassive, but I caught a brief flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, concern? Guilt? Oh right, he said casually. She heard about the baby and was just acknowledging how overwhelming new parenthood can be. She has kids of her own, so she understands the adjustment period. The explanation sounded reasonable, but it raised new questions. Derek had never mentioned that Vanessa had children, and her message hadn't sounded like maternal advice from one parent to another. It had felt more personal, more intimate, like someone who was genuinely invested in Derek's emotional state. That's thoughtful of her, I managed, shifting Ethan to my other arm as he began to stir. I don't think you've mentioned that she's a mother, haven't? Derek moved to the window, looking out at the parking lot rather than meeting my eyes. She's got 2 teenagers, divorced, so she handles a lot on her own. That's part of why her property search has been so specific. She needs something that works for her family situation. The additional details felt like overcompensation, the way people elaborate when they're trying to make a lie sound convincing. I'd seen Derek do this with clients when he was stretching the truth about property features or market conditions. The more specific he became, the more likely he was bending reality to fit his narrative. Ethan began to fuss, his tiny fists waving as he searched for food. I attempted to position him for nursing, wincing as the movement pulled at my surgical side. Derek noticed my discomfort and moved to help, but his phone buzzed again, and I saw his attention split between supporting me and wondering who was trying to reach him. "Go ahead and check it," I said, exhaustion making me more direct than usual. "I can manage." Derek hesitated, then pulled out his phone. His face darkened as he read whatever message had arrived. "I need to make another call," he said apologetically. "This situation with the downtown property is falling apart, and if we don't handle it tonight, we could lose a six-figure commission." He was gone again before I could respond, leaving me to struggle with nursing while still recovering from major surgery. Through the window I could see him pacing in the hallway, his conversation animated and intense, but this time, his body language looked different, less like business frustration, and more like personal conflict. Nurse Linda appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene of me fumbling with Ethan while Derek gestured emphatically outside. "Let me help you with that," she said kindly, moving to adjust Ethan's position and make nursing more comfortable. "First times can be tricky, especially when you're still healing." As she helped me establish a better feeding position, I found myself studying Derek through the glass. His conversation had shifted from animated to what looked almost like pleading. His free hand ran through his hair repeatedly, a gesture I recognized as his stress response. But what kind of real estate deal would prompt that level of emotional investment? "Is everything all right, honey?" Linda asked softly, following my gaze toward Derek. "You look worried." "Just tired," I replied. But we both knew that wasn't the whole truth. "Everything feels overwhelming right now." Linda nodded understandingly. "The first few days after delivery can be emotionally intense, even under the best circumstances. Your hormones are adjusting, you're learning to care for a newborn, and you're recovering from surgery. It's completely normal to feel uncertain about things." Her kindness almost brought tears to my eyes. I wanted to confide in her about my growing suspicions, about the phone calls and the mysterious client, and the feeling that Derek was emotionally absent during what should have been the most important moment of our lives together. But how could I voice such doubts when I had no proof? Only intuition and a growing sense that something fundamental had shifted in my marriage. Derek ended his call and returned to the room, slipping his phone back into his pocket with the careful precision of someone hiding something important. "Sorry about that," he said, moving to sit in the chair beside my bed. "Crisis averted. At least for now." He reached out to stroke Ethan's head, as our son nursed contentedly. For a moment Derek's expression softened into something that looked like genuine wonder. "He's really something, isn't he?" he said quietly. "I can't believe we made him." The tenderness in his voice reminded me of the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who used to prioritize our relationship over everything else. I wanted to hold on to that moment, to believe that becoming a father would restore Derek's focus to our family, but even as he gazed at our son, I could see part of his attention elsewhere, probably wondering when his phone would buzz again with another urgent message. "Derek," I said carefully, "after we go home, do you think you could take some time off? Maybe just a few days to help us settle in and bond as a family?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I wish I could, but this downtown deal is at a critical stage. Marcus can handle most of the routine stuff, but the investors specifically requested that I manage their concerns personally. If we lose this contract, it could set the business back by months." The excuse sounded rehearsed, like he'd been preparing for this conversation. "What about family leave? Don't you have some flexibility for when your son is born? Of course I do, he said quickly. I'm planning to work from home as much as possible. And I'll definitely be around for the important stuff. But you know how real estate works. Clients don't pause their timelines because we have personal milestones. I nodded. But his words felt hollow. In the 3 years I'd known Derek professionally, he'd never hesitated to delegate responsibilities when it suited him. He'd taken long weekends for golf trips, extended client dinners that turned into social events, and business conferences that seemed more like vacation. The idea that he couldn't step back for a few days after his son's birth suggested that whatever was demanding his attention wasn't standard business. Ethan finished nursing and settled back into sleep, his tiny body warm and trusting against my chest. Looking down at him, I felt a fierce protectiveness that surprised me with its intensity. This little person deserved parents who were fully present, who prioritized his needs over external distraction. He deserved a father who saw his birth as the most important event in his life, not an inconvenience to be managed around business obligations. I love you both, Derek said, leaning over to kiss my forehead. I know this isn't ideal timing with everything happening at work, but once this deal closes, things will calm down. I promise. I wanted to believe him, but Derek's promises had become increasingly unreliable over the past year. There was always another deal, another crisis, another client who required his immediate and personal attention. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The pattern had become so consistent that I'd stopped expecting him to follow through on commitments related to our relationship. As visiting hours ended and Derek prepared to leave for the night, he gathered his things with the efficiency of someone eager to be elsewhere. I'll be back first thing in the morning, he said, giving Ethan one last gentle touch. Try to get some rest, and call me if you need anything at all. After he left, the room felt both more peaceful and more lonely. Ethan slept beside me in his hospital bassinet, his breathing steady and reassuring. I found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation and interaction from the day, searching for clues about what Derek was really doing when he stepped away for those urgent phone calls. The doubt that had been growing throughout my pregnancy crystallized into something sharper and more uncomfortable. I'd been making excuses for Derek's behavior because I wanted to believe in our marriage, because I didn't want to acknowledge that the man I'd chosen to father my children might be deceiving me in fundamental ways. But lying there in that hospital bed, holding my newborn son while his father prioritized mysterious phone calls over bonding time, I realized I needed to know the truth. Whatever Derek was hiding, whatever was demanding so much of his attention and emotional energy, I deserved to understand what was happening in my own marriage. The night stretched ahead of me, filled with feeding schedules and recovery discomfort in the weight of questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. But for the first time in months, I felt something besides confusion and self-doubt. I felt determined to protect my son and myself, whatever that might require. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start paying closer attention to Derek's phone calls and excuses. Tomorrow, I would stop making assumptions about his faithfulness and start looking for evidence of what was really demanding his time and energy. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of discovering whether my marriage was worth fighting for, or whether I needed to prepare for a very different future than the one I'd imagined. The discharge from Millbrook General came sooner than expected. Dr. Martinez cleared me to go home after just 2 days, praising my recovery progress and Ethan's excellent health markers. Derek arrived that morning with an oversized bouquet of roses and an apologetic smile, explaining that he'd been tied up with emergency client meetings, but was now completely focused on bringing his family home. As we gathered our belongings, Derek's phone remained conspicuously silent. No urgent calls, no frantic text messages, no crisis that required his immediate attention. The sudden calm in his professional life felt almost theatrical, as if he'd deliberately cleared his schedule to play the role of devoted husband and father for the hospital staff and discharge process. Vanessa understood that family comes first, Derek explained when I commented on the unusual quiet from his business contacts. She agreed to postpone our property viewing until next week, so I could focus on getting you and Ethan settled at home. The casual mention of postponed meetings with Vanessa sent a chill through me. Why would a client need to understand about family priorities unless their relationship had crossed professional boundaries? In 3 years of Derek's real estate career, I'd never heard him discuss his personal life with clients or seek their permission to prioritize family events. Our house on Oak Ridge felt different when we walked through the front door. The same furniture, the same photographs, the same carefully chosen paint colors that Derek and I had selected together when we'd bought the place 2 years earlier. But something fundamental had shifted during my brief hospital stay, as if the foundation of trust that made this space feel like home had developed invisible cracks. Derek carried Ethan's car seat into the living room with ceremonial care, setting it down gently and stepping back to admire his sleeping son. "Home sweet home," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Our little family finally together where we belong." I leaned into his embrace, wanting desperately to feel the security and love that his words promised, but my body remained tense, hyper-aware of the phone in his pocket and the questions that had taken root during those long hospital hours. When Derek's arms tightened around me, I found myself wondering if he was holding me or restraining me, protecting our intimacy or preventing me from looking too closely at the spaces between his words. The first week home established a routine that felt both familiar and strange. Derek worked from his home office during the day, emerging periodically to check on Ethan and me, bringing coffee and asking about feeding schedules with the careful attention of someone following a script. His phone calls continued, but they were shorter and conducted behind the closed door of his office, making it impossible for me to gauge their content or urgency. Every evening, Derek helped with dinner and baby care with the dedication of a man determined to prove his commitment to fatherhood. He changed diapers without complaint, took the late-night feeding shifts that allowed me to recover from surgery, and spoke to Ethan in the gentle tones of someone genuinely enchanted by his son. But I noticed things that troubled me. Derek's phone, which used to charge openly on his nightstand, now disappeared into his office each night. His laptop, formerly left casually around the house, remained locked in his desk drawer when not in use. Most concerning were the moments when I caught Derek staring into space with an expression of profound conflict, as if he were wrestling with decisions that had nothing to do with real estate or new parenthood. Nicole Rodriguez, my closest friend since college, visited on Thursday afternoon with homemade lasagna and an eagerness to meet Ethan. We'd maintained our friendship despite her skepticism about Derek, whom she'd always found charming but somehow insubstantial. Nicole had never voiced direct criticism of my husband, but I'd sensed her reservations in the careful way she asked about our relationship and the polite distance she maintained from Derek during social gatherings. "He's absolutely beautiful," Nicole said, cradling Ethan while I attempted to eat something more substantial than the crackers and juice I'd been surviving on. "Those eyes are definitely going to break hearts. How are you feeling?" "Really feeling," not the public answer. I hesitated, stirring my soup while considering how much of my growing unease I could share without sounding paranoid or ungrateful. "Overwhelmed," I finally admitted. "Everything feels different since the hospital. Derek's been helpful, but something seems off. I can't put my finger on it." Nicole nodded thoughtfully, shifting Ethan to her shoulder as he began to fuss. "Different how? Is he struggling with the adjustment to fatherhood?" "Maybe," I said, though that explanation didn't capture the specific nature of my concern. "He's been very attentive to Ethan and me, but it feels performative somehow, like he's checking boxes on a list rather than responding naturally to his new role as a father. Have you tried talking to him about it? How do I bring up a feel? How do I tell him that his helpfulness feels calculated without sounding crazy?" I set down my spoon, appetite disappearing as I voiced my fears aloud. "Maybe I'm just hormonal and reading too much into normal behavior." Nicole studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd known me long enough to recognize when I was minimizing my own perceptions. "Rachel, you're one of the most intuitive people I know. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust your instincts, especially when it comes to protecting yourself and Ethan." Her validation gave me permission to acknowledge what I'd been trying to dismiss. The discrepancies in Derek's behavior weren't imaginary or hormone-induced. They were real patterns that deserved investigation, not rationalization. That evening, after Derek had retreated to his office for what he described as urgent contract review, I found myself standing outside his door listening to his muffled phone conversation. The tone was different from his usual business calls, more intimate and emotionally charged. I caught fragments through the heavy wood. "Can't keep doing this." And "she's starting to ask questions." And most disturbing, "never meant for it to go this far." When the conversation ended and Derek emerged from his office, his face was flushed and his hands trembling slightly. He avoided eye contact as he announced his intention to take a shower, disappearing upstairs without the usual kiss or inquiry about my evening. I stood in the hallway for several minutes after his footsteps faded, my heart pounding with the implications of what I'd overheard. The pronoun she in Derek's conversation could only refer to me, which meant his mysterious phone calls were at least partially about our relationship. Someone was advising him on how to handle my suspicions, which suggested there was something significant to hide. Sleep eluded me that night. Derek lay beside me with the steady breathing of someone genuinely exhausted, but I found myself studying his profile in the dim light from Ethan's nightlight, wondering how well I actually knew the man I'd married. We'd dated for 2 years before getting engaged, lived together for another year before the wedding, and I'd believed I understood his character and values. But people were capable of compartmentalizing their lives in ways that could hide entire personalities from those closest to them. Friday morning brought an opportunity I hadn't expected. Derek announced over breakfast that he needed to drive to Portland for an emergency client meeting. Something about investors threatening to withdraw from a major commercial development unless he addressed their concerns personally. "I'll be gone most of the day," he explained, gulping coffee while checking his phone for messages. "Marcus tried to handle it, but they specifically requested me." "You know how these high-stakes deals work," I nodded sympathetically while mentally cataloging the inconsistencies in his story. Derek had never mentioned working with Portland investors, and Marcus had always been fully capable of managing client relationships independently. The sudden urgency felt suspicious, especially given Derek's recent pattern of mysterious phone calls and secretive behavior. "Will you be home for dinner?" I asked, testing whether he'd commit to a specific timeline. "Probably not until late," Derek replied, avoiding my eyes as he gathered his briefcase and jacket. "These investor meetings can drag on for hours, especially when they're nervous about market conditions." "Don't wait up for me." After Derek left, I spent an hour feeding Ethan and getting him settled for his morning nap. The house felt different with Derek's absence, more honest somehow, as if the walls themselves could relax when they weren't required to maintain his carefully constructed facade. I found myself drawn to Derek's home office, a space I'd rarely entered during our marriage. Derek had always characterized it as boring and cluttered, filled with contracts and property listings that would be of no interest to me. But standing in the doorway, I realized his description had been designed to discourage curiosity rather than accurately represent the room's content. The office was meticulously organized, with file cabinets labeled by project and client, a computer system that looked more sophisticated than necessary for basic real estate transactions, and a second phone line that Derek had never mentioned. Everything was locked or password protected, suggesting a level of security that seemed excessive for routine business activities. Derek's desk drawers were secured with a small combination lock, the kind used for gym lockers or travel luggage. I'd never noticed it before because Derek always kept his office door closed when he wasn't working. The locked drawers felt like a deliberate barrier, a way of ensuring that even someone with access to his home office couldn't examine his most private document. I was about to leave the office when I noticed Derek's backup phone charger plugged into an outlet behind his desk. Attached to it was a phone I'd never seen before, a basic model that looked designed for temporary or secondary use. The screen was dark, but when I pressed the power button, it illuminated to show dozens of unread text messages. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the message preview screen. Most were from Vanessa Cole, but the content was nothing like business correspondence. "Missing you already," read one from earlier that morning. "Can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore," said another from the previous evening. The timestamps corresponded exactly with Derek's mysterious phone calls and urgent meeting. The messages painted a picture of an intimate relationship that had been developing parallel to Derek's marriage and new fatherhood. Vanessa wasn't a client looking for commercial property. She was Derek's lover, someone who shared his bed when he claimed to be working late, someone who understood his schedule well enough to coordinate their communications around my presence in the house. I scrolled further back through the message history, my stomach churning as the extent of Derek's deception became clear. The relationship had been ongoing for at least 8 months, spanning most of my pregnancy and continuing through Ethan's birth. While I'd been planning our son's nursery and preparing for our expanding family, Derek had been building an entirely separate life with another woman. The most recent exchange between Derek and Vanessa had taken place that morning, just before Derek left for his supposed client meeting in Portland. "Rachel's getting suspicious," Derek had written. "We need to be more careful until I figure out how to handle this situation." Vanessa's response was immediate and chilling. "You said you were going to tell her after the baby came. How much longer are you going to keep lying to both of us?" Derek's final message before leaving the house made my blood freeze. "Give me a few more weeks to figure out the best approach. Rachel's still recovering from surgery, and I don't want to destabilize things while she's vulnerable. After that we can move forward with our plans." I set the phone down with shaking hands, my mind reeling from the implications of what I'd discovered. Derek wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to leave me, possibly taking our newborn son away from me, while I was still physically and emotionally vulnerable from childbirth. The timing suggested calculation rather than passion, a deliberate strategy to maximize his advantage while minimizing my ability to respond effectively. The sound of Ethan crying from his nursery snapped me back to immediate reality. I quickly returned Derek's secret phone to its charger and left his office, closing the door behind me with the same careful precision I'd observed when Derek entered and exited that space. As I lifted Ethan from his crib and settled into the rocking chair for his feeding, my mind raced with questions about how to proceed. I had evidence of Derek's infidelity and his plans to end our marriage, but I also had a 3-week-old baby, and was still recovering from major surgery. Any decisions I made would affect not only my own future but Ethan's welfare and security. Nicole's advice echoed in my memory: "Trust your instincts, especially when it comes to protecting yourself and Ethan." My instincts were screaming that Derek's planned revelation would be designed to benefit him rather than me, that his timing and approach would be calculated to leave me with the fewest possible options and resources. I needed help, but not from friends or family, who might inadvertently reveal my knowledge before I was prepared to act. I needed professional guidance from someone who understood the legal and financial implications of Derek's deception, someone who could help me protect my interests and my son's future. That afternoon, while Ethan napped peacefully in his swing, I conducted careful internet research on divorce attorneys in the Millbrook area. I needed someone with experience in complex asset division and child custody cases, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by Derek's business connections or persuasive personality. Jonathan Hayes emerged as the most promising option. His law firm specialized in family law with particular expertise in cases involving business assets and parental rights. The reviews praised his thoroughness and discretion, qualities that seemed essential given the delicate nature of my situation. I made an appointment for the following Monday, using my maiden name and explaining that I needed a confidential consultation regarding a potential divorce. The receptionist assured me that initial consultations were privileged communications, even if I ultimately decided not to retain their services. The weekend stretched ahead of me like a minefield. Derek would return from his supposed business trip expecting to find me recuperating quietly while he continued his double life. I would have to maintain the facade of ignorance while protecting myself and Ethan from whatever disruption Derek was planning. For the first time since Ethan's birth, I felt something other than confusion and self-doubt. I felt angry, not just about Derek's betrayal but about his assumption that I would remain passive while he manipulated our family's future for his own convenience. He'd underestimated my strength and my determination to protect my son, mistakes that would prove costly when I was ready to reveal what I'd discovered. Derek returned home late that evening, as predicted, with elaborate stories about difficult investors and last-minute contract negotiations. He kissed me gently and asked about my day with the concerned attention of a devoted husband,
never suspecting that I'd spent the afternoon planning my escape from his web of lies. As he settled into bed beside me, Derek's phone buzzed with what he claimed was a final message from his Portland clients, but I knew better. Somewhere across town, Vanessa Cole was probably waiting for Derek's report on how much longer they'd need to maintain their secret while he decided the best way to abandon his recovering wife and newborn son. The knowledge burned in my chest like a physical weight, but I forced myself to breathe steadily and maintain the appearance of sleep. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Derek prepared for work with his usual efficiency, kissing Ethan's forehead and promising to be home early for dinner. His performance as the dedicated family man had become so polished that I wondered if he'd begun to believe his own act.
As he gathered his briefcase and car keys, I maintained my own facade of the recovering new mother, grateful for his support and looking forward to his return. The moment Derek's car disappeared around the corner, I began preparing for my appointment with Jonathan Hayes. Claire had agreed to watch Ethan for a few hours, believing I needed time for a routine postpartum checkup. The deception felt necessary given the sensitivity of my actual destination and the potential consequences if Derek discovered my investigation before I was ready to act. Hayes' legal associates occupied a modest brick building in downtown Millbrook, deliberately understated in a way that suggested confidence rather than pretension. The reception area was warm but professional, with leather chairs and legal journals that created an atmosphere of competence without intimidation. Jonathan Hayes himself matched his office perfectly. A man in his early 50s with silver-touched hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate everything without making judgments. He wore a charcoal suit that had clearly been tailored but wasn't ostentatious, projecting the kind of quiet authority that came from years of handling sensitive family matters. "Mrs. Watson," he said, using the maiden name I'd provided when making the appointment. "Please, have a seat. I understand you're interested in discussing some family law matters." I settled into the chair across from his desk, suddenly aware of how surreal this moment felt. 3 weeks ago, I'd been planning a nursery and preparing for the joy of new motherhood. Now I was consulting a divorce attorney about protecting myself from the man I'd chosen to father my child. "I need to ask about confidentiality first," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "If I share information with you today, even if I don't ultimately hire you, is that conversation protected?" "Absolutely," Hayes replied without hesitation. "Attorney-client privilege begins the moment you walk through that door seeking legal advice. Nothing you tell me today can be disclosed to anyone without your explicit permission, regardless of whether you decide to retain my services." The assurance gave me courage to continue. "My husband is having an affair. I have evidence of the relationship and text messages suggesting he's planning to leave me. We have a 3-week-old baby and I'm still recovering from a C-section. I need to understand my options before he makes his move." Hayes leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more focused. "Let's start with the basics. How long have you been married and what kind of assets are we discussing?" 3 years married, together for Derek owns a real estate business with a partner. We have a house in Oak Ridge with about $60,000 in equity, joint savings accounts and his business assets that I don't fully understand. I paused, realizing how little I actually knew about our financial situation. "He's always handled the business finances separately from our household expenses. That's not uncommon, but it can complicate divorce proceedings," Hayes noted, making brief notes on a legal pad. "Tell me about the evidence you mentioned. Text messages between your husband and the other woman." I described finding Derek's secret phone and the messages between him and Vanessa, including their discussions about timing his revelation to maximize his advantage while I was still vulnerable from surgery. Hayes listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as I detailed the extent of Derek's deception. "The timing concerns me," Hayes said when I finished. "Oregon has equitable distribution laws, which means marital assets should be divided fairly regardless of fault. But if your husband is planning to present you with divorce papers while you're still recovering from surgery, he may be hoping you'll agree to unfavorable terms out of shock or emotional distress. What should I do?" "Several things, and we need to move quickly." Hayes pulled out a fresh legal pad, and began outlining a strategy. First, we need to secure copies of all financial documents before your husband realizes you're aware of his plan. Bank statements, business records, tax returns, investment accounts, anything that shows the true scope of your marital assets. How do I get business records? Derek keeps everything locked in his office. We'll discuss that. Second, we need to document the affair comprehensively. Those text messages you found are excellent evidence, but we need photographs of the messages, not just your testimony about what you read. Third, we need to consider whether your husband might attempt to hide assets or transfer money to accounts you can't access. The scope of what Hayes was suggesting felt overwhelming. This sounds like I'm planning to wage war against my own husband. You're planning to protect yourself and your child from someone who's already waging war against you, Hayes corrected gently. Your husband has been deceiving you for months while planning to abandon you during your most vulnerable period. That's not the behavior of someone who has your best interests at heart. His blunt assessment stung because it forced me to confront the reality I'd been trying to minimize. Derek wasn't just having an affair or going through a midlife crisis. He was actively planning to destabilize my life while I was least equipped to defend myself. What about Ethan? Can Derek take him away from me? Oregon courts prioritize the best interests of the child above all other considerations. A 3-week-old baby who's being breastfed will almost certainly remain with his mother, especially given your husband's apparent lack of involvement in daily childcare. But we need to document Derek's absence during crucial early bonding periods. Hayes spent the next hour outlining a comprehensive plan for protecting my interests. He recommended hiring a private investigator to document Derek's affair, gathering financial records to prevent asset hiding, and preparing divorce papers that could be filed immediately if Derek attempted to ambush me with his own legal action. I need to ask about fees, I said, realizing I had no idea how much this protection would cost or how I'd pay for it without Derek's knowledge. My retainer for a case like this is $5,000, with additional fees based on complexity and time involved. Hayes explained, given the circumstances, I'm willing to work with you on payment arrangements. We can also explore whether your husband's business assets might cover legal fees as part of the settlement. The financial commitment felt daunting, but the alternative of facing Derek's planned ambush without professional help seemed far more dangerous. I agreed to Hayes's representation and scheduled a follow-up meeting for later that week. Driving home from the law office, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. I'd taken the first concrete step toward protecting myself and Ethan, but I'd also crossed a line that would fundamentally change my marriage regardless of how events ultimately unfold. There would be no returning to ignorant trust, no pretending that Derek's deception was a temporary aberration that could be overcome with counseling and forgiveness. Claire was reading in the living room when I returned, with Ethan sleeping peacefully in his bouncer beside her chair. "How did your appointment go?" she asked, looking up from her book. "Fine," I replied, hoping my face didn't reveal the magnitude of what I'd just set in motion. "Everything's healing well. You look tired. Are you getting enough rest with the night feeding?" I nodded, though exhaustion was the least of my concerns. "Derek's been helpful, but it's still an adjustment." Claire studied my expression with the perceptiveness of an older sister who'd known me my entire life. "Rachel, is everything okay? You seem stressed about something beyond normal new mother worries." The temptation to confide in her was strong, but Hayes had emphasized the importance of discretion until I was ready to act. "Just overwhelmed," I said. "Everything feels so different now." That evening, Derek returned home with Chinese takeout and an apologetic explanation about another demanding client situation. He helped with Ethan's bath and bedtime routine with the attentiveness of someone determined to prove his commitment to fatherhood, never suspecting that I'd spent the day planning for his betrayal. As we ate dinner, Derek's phone remained face down on the table, silent for the first time in weeks. The unusual quiet felt ominous rather than reassuring, as if Derek had instructed Vanessa to maintain radio silence while he evaluated how much I suspected about their relationship. "I've been thinking," Derek said between bites of Kung Pao chicken. "Maybe we should plan a weekend getaway once you're feeling stronger. Just the three of us. Somewhere peaceful where we can focus on being a family. The suggestion sounded romantic and thoughtful, but I heard it differently now. Derek was laying groundwork for his revelation, creating positive memories that would make his eventual abandonment seem more tragic than calculated. Or perhaps he was planning to use a romantic weekend as the setting for his announcement, believing the change of scenery would make me more receptive to his plans. That sounds nice, I replied carefully. Where were you thinking? Maybe There's a family resort near Lincoln City that caters to couples with young children. They have babysitting services and spa treatments for new mothers. The specificity of his suggestion made me wonder if he'd already researched the location, possibly even made reservations. Derek had always been a planner, but this level of detail about a hypothetical trip felt like advanced preparation for a significant conversation. How's work going? I asked, testing whether he'd maintain his fiction about demanding clients and urgent deadlines. Derek's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a brief flicker of something that might have been guilt or calculation. Busy, but manageable. The Portland deal is moving forward and Vanessa finally found a property that meets her investment criteria. The casual mention of Vanessa sent adrenaline surging through my veins. Derek was testing me, watching for reactions that might indicate how much I knew about his relationship with her. The fact that he'd brought up her name unprompted suggested he was growing confident in his ability to deceive me. That's good, I said neutrally. I know how much effort you've put into helping her find the right commercial space. She's been a challenging client, but the commission will be worth it, Derek continued, his tone carefully professional. High-maintenance investors often are the most profitable in the long run. I nodded sympathetically while my mind catalogued the lies embedded in his explanation. Vanessa wasn't an investor or a client. She was Derek's lover, someone who shared intimate conversations about our marriage and his plans for our future. The fact that Derek could discuss her so casually while sitting across from his wife and newborn son demonstrated a level of compartmentalization that was genuinely chilling. That night, after Derek had fallen asleep, I crept downstairs to his office. My hands shook as I photographed the messages on his secret phone, documenting the evidence Hayes had insisted we'd need for any legal proceedings. The timestamps and content painted an irrefutable picture of Derek's deception, proof that his affair had continued even after Ethan's birth. One message exchange from that very evening made my stomach turn. While Derek had been helping with Ethan's bath and discussing our hypothetical family vacation, he'd been texting Vanessa about their plans for the following day. She's starting to relax her guard, Derek had written. I think we can meet tomorrow afternoon without raising suspicions. Vanessa's response was immediate. I'm tired of hiding. When are you going to tell her the truth? Soon, Derek had replied. I want to make sure she's emotionally stable enough to handle the conversation. The last thing I need is for her to have a breakdown that affects my custody rights. The calculated cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. Derek wasn't planning to end our marriage out of passion for another woman or even dissatisfaction with our relationship. He was strategically timing his revelation to maximize his advantages in what he anticipated would be a contentious divorce and custody battle. I photographed every message, my fury growing with each piece of evidence. Derek had spent months planning his exit strategy while I prepared for our son's arrival, believing we were building a family together. He'd attended birthing classes and assembled cribs while texting another woman about their future together. Most horrifically, he'd held my hand during surgery while calculating the best timing to abandon me during my recovery. The private investigator Hayes had recommended was named Tom Bradley, a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial cases. I called him the next morning while Derek was supposedly showing properties to potential buyers. Mrs. Pemberton, Bradley said when I explained my situation. Attorney Hayes briefed me on your case. I understand we need to move quickly given your husband's apparent timeline. How quickly can you document their relationship? I can start surveillance immediately. If they're meeting regularly, I should have photographic evidence within a few days. Hotel records, restaurant visits, any public displays of affection that support the affair allegation. The clinical language made Derek's betrayal sound like a business transaction,
which perhaps it was from his perspective. "What do you need from me?" "Your husband's schedule, vehicle description, any information about where and when he typically meets this woman. The more specific you can be, the faster I can gather the evidence we need." I provided Derek's license plate number, work address, and the details I'd gleaned from his text messages about meeting times and location. Bradley assured me he'd begin surveillance that afternoon and would have preliminary findings within 48 hours. Wednesday brought Derek's most elaborate deception yet. He announced at breakfast that Marcus needed him to attend a real estate conference in Salem, an overnight trip that would require him to leave immediately after lunch and return the following evening. "I hate to leave you alone with Ethan so soon," Derek said, his expression perfectly calibrated to convey reluctant duty, "but this conference focuses on commercial investment strategies, exactly what we need for the Portland project." The lie was so smooth and confident that I almost admired Derek's skill at deception. If I hadn't known about Vanessa and his secret phone, I would have believed every word and probably encouraged him to attend for the sake of his business development. "We'll be fine," I assured him. "Ethan and I are getting into a good routine. I'll call tonight to check on you both," Derek promised, leaning down to kiss my forehead with the tender concern of a devoted husband. After Derek left, I immediately called Tom Bradley to alert him about the overnight trip. "This is perfect," Bradley said. "If they're planning to spend the night together, I'll have definitive proof of the relationship." The hours dragged by with excruciating slowness. I tried to focus on Ethan's needs and my own recovery, but my mind kept spinning through scenarios of what Derek and Vanessa were doing while I sat home alone with our newborn son. The betrayal felt fresh and raw each time I allowed myself to fully comprehend the magnitude of his deception. Derek called that evening as promised, his voice warm with concern as he asked about my day and Ethan's feeding schedule. In the background, I could hear what sounded like restaurant noise, clinking glasses and muted conversation that supported his fiction about being at a professional conference. "How's the conference going?" I asked, testing whether he'd elaborate on his fabricated story. "Informative but exhausting," Derek replied smoothly. "Lots of networking opportunities and seminars about market trends. I'm learning strategies that should help us expand the business significantly." Every word was a lie delivered with such casual confidence that I wondered how many other stories Derek had told me over the years that I'd accepted without question. How many business trips and client emergencies and urgent meetings had actually been rendezvous with women I'd never suspected existed. "I miss you both," Derek continued. "Give Ethan an extra kiss from Daddy." The endearment made me feel physically ill. Derek was playing the role of the devoted father missing his family while he was actually spending the evening with his mistress, probably in some romantic restaurant planning their future together.
Thursday morning brought a call from Tom Bradley with news that confirmed my worst fears and vindicated my decision to investigate. "I have extensive photographic and video evidence," Bradley reported. "Your husband and Vanessa Cole checked into the Riverside Inn in Salem yesterday afternoon. They had dinner at an intimate French restaurant, spent the night together, and are currently having breakfast in the hotel's cafe." The stark confirmation of Derek's betrayal hit me harder than I'd expected, even though I'd known intellectually what the surveillance would reveal. Hearing the details made it impossible to maintain any illusions about Derek's character or his commitment to our marriage. "How solid is the evidence?" I asked. "Ironclad. Clear photographs of them kissing, holding hands, entering and leaving the hotel room together. Video footage of intimate conversation during dinner. If this goes to court, there won't be any question about the nature of their relationship." I thanked Bradley and immediately called Jonathan Hayes to report the findings. "This changes our timeline," Hayes said after I described the evidence. "Your husband may be planning to accelerate his revelation now that he's had an extended romantic getaway with his girlfriend. What do you recommend?" "We need to be prepared to file immediately if Derek attempts to blindside you with divorce paper. I'm going to draft a comprehensive petition that protects your interests and requests temporary custody, support and exclusive use of the marital home." The legal machinery was now in motion, but I felt strangely calm rather than panic. The uncertainty and self-doubt that had plagued me since Ethan's birth had been replaced by clear-eyed determination to protect my son and myself from Derek's calculated manipulation. Derek returned home Thursday evening with gifts that felt like guilt offerings: expensive flowers, gourmet chocolates, and a silver bracelet that he claimed reminded him of me while he was away. He was effusive in his affection, holding Ethan for extended periods, and asking detailed questions about my day with the focused attention of someone trying to assuage his own conscience. "I missed you both more than I expected," Derek said as we prepared for bed. "Being away made me realize how important family is, especially now that we have Ethan." The irony of his statement was breathtaking. Derek had spent the previous 24 hours with another woman while claiming to miss his family, planning our family's destruction while professing to value what we'd built together. "The conference was useful, but I'm glad to be home," Derek continued, settling into bed beside me. "There's nothing more important than what we have right here." I murmured appropriate responses while my mind raced with plans for protecting Ethan and myself from the man lying next to me. Derek had made his choice months ago when he began his affair with Vanessa. Now it was time for me to make mine. Friday morning would bring Derek's revelation, though not in the way he'd planned. Jonathan Hayes had scheduled an emergency meeting for early that morning to finalize our legal strategy. By the time Derek woke up, I would be prepared for whatever bombshell he planned to drop. As Derek's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, I lay awake planning for a confrontation that would end my marriage but hopefully secure my son's future. The woman who had entered Millbrook General for Ethan's birth was gone, replaced by someone harder and more determined. Derek had underestimated my strength and my willingness to fight for what mattered most. Tomorrow he would learn exactly how costly that miscalculation would prove to be. Friday morning erupted with the sound of Derek's phone buzzing incessantly at 6 a.m. He fumbled for it in the darkness, his movements urgent and panicked in a way I'd never witnessed before. The blue glow illuminated his face as he read whatever message had arrived, and I watched his expression transform from confusion to something approaching terror. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning the sleepy concern of an unsuspecting wife. Derek was already climbing out of bed, pulling on clothes with frantic efficiency. "Emergency at the office," he said, his voice tight with stress. "One of our biggest deals is falling apart and Marcus can't handle it alone." I recognized the lie immediately, but Derek's panic was genuine. Something had happened overnight that disrupted whatever carefully laid plans he'd been nurturing. As he rushed through his morning routine, I caught glimpses of him texting rapidly, his fingers flying across the phone screen with desperate urgency. "I'll call you later," Derek promised, leaning down to kiss my forehead with distracted affection. This might take most of the day to sort out. The moment his car disappeared down Oak Ridge, I called Jonathan Hayes. "Something's wrong," I reported. "Derek left in a panic this morning, claiming there's an emergency at work." "This isn't his normal pattern." "Interesting timing," Hayes mused. "Tom Bradley filed his surveillance report last night. If your husband has connections in certain circles, he might have learned that he's being investigated." The implications sent a chill through me. If Derek knew about the private investigator, he might also suspect that I'd discovered his affair. His carefully planned timeline for revealing his intentions could accelerate dramatically, potentially leaving me scrambling to protect myself and Ethan. "What do we do now?" "We accelerate our own timeline," Hayes said decisively. "Can you meet me at my office in 2 hours? I want to have divorce papers ready to file by end of business today." I arranged for Claire to watch Ethan again, using the excuse of a follow-up medical appointment. The deception was becoming easier, though I hated lying to my sister about something so fundamental to my life. But secrecy felt essential until I understood exactly what Derek was planning and how quickly he intended to move. Hayes's office felt different during my second visit, charged with the energy of impending action rather than preliminary discussion. The attorney had clearly been working since early morning, with documents spread across his desk and multiple legal books open to specific statutes and precedent. "I've prepared comprehensive divorce papers that should protect your interests regardless of what your husband attempts," Hayes explained, guiding me through the thick stack of documents. "We're requesting temporary custody of Ethan, temporary spousal support, exclusive use of the marital home, and a restraining order preventing Derek from disposing of any marital assets. The scope of the legal protection felt both reassuring and terrifying. These papers would fundamentally alter my life and Ethan's future, setting in motion events that couldn't be undone or negotiated away. But the alternative of allowing Derek to control the timing and terms of our divorce seemed far more dangerous. What about his business asset? That's where things get complicated, Hayes admitted. Derek owns the real estate company in partnership with Marcus Sterling. We'll need forensic accounting to determine the true value of his business interests and whether he's been hiding income or transferring assets to protect them from division. The financial investigation would take months, Hayes explained, but he could request court orders to freeze business accounts and prevent Derek from liquidating assets while the case proceeded. The legal machinery was complex and expensive, but it offered the best chance of securing a fair settlement. There's something else we need to discuss, Hayes continued, his expression growing more serious. If Derek has been planning this divorce for months, he may have already begun moving money to accounts you can't access. We need to act immediately to protect whatever assets remain in joint accounts. The conversation felt surreal, like planning a military campaign against someone I'd shared a bed with for 3 years. But Derek's deception had been equally strategic, equally calculated to maximize his advantages while minimizing mine. I was simply responding to a war he'd already declared. I signed the divorce papers with a hand that trembled only slightly, authorizing Hayes to file them immediately if Derek attempted to serve me with his own legal document. The power to strike first felt like the only weapon I had against someone who'd been planning this battle for months while I remained oblivious to the conflict. Returning home, I found Derek's car in the driveway and lights on throughout the house. He'd returned from his supposed emergency much earlier than expected, another deviation from his usual patterns that suggested the morning's crisis had been resolved or was entirely fictional. Derek was sitting at the kitchen table when I entered, his expression unreadable and his posture unnaturally rigid. Spread before him were bank statements, legal documents, and what appeared to be a folder of photographs. My heart hammered as I recognized Tom Bradley's surveillance images among the papers, evidence of Derek's affair with Vanessa displayed in stark black and white detail. "We need to talk," Derek said quietly, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth or confidence. I set my purse down carefully, buying time to process this unexpected confrontation. Derek had somehow obtained copies of the private investigator's report, which meant he knew that I'd been investigating his affair. The power dynamic I'd been trying to establish through legal preparation had just shifted dramatically. "About what?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him with feigned ignorance. Derek picked up one of the photographs, a clear image of him kissing Vanessa outside the Riverside Inn. "About these," he said flatly, "about how long you've known, and what you're planning to do with this information." The direct confrontation caught me off guard, though I realized I should have anticipated it. Derek had always been intelligent and resourceful, qualities that made him successful in real estate and apparently also in discovering when he was being investigated. "How did you get those?" "Marcus has a friend who works security for the hotel. He noticed a man with a camera taking pictures of guests and reported it to management. When Marcus described the situation to me, I realized what was happening." Derek's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing a routine business transaction rather than evidence of his infidelity. The explanation revealed how quickly information traveled in small communities like Millbrook, where everyone knew everyone else's business. It also demonstrated Derek's network of connections and his ability to gather intelligence when he felt threatened. "So you know that I know," I said, abandoning any pretense of ignorance. "I know you hired a private investigator to follow me and Vanessa. I know you've been suspicious for weeks, probably since the hospital. What I don't know is what you plan to do with this information." Derek's calm demeanor was more unnerving than anger would have been. He was treating our conversation like a business negotiation, evaluating my position and calculating his response based on the strength of my evidence and the potential damage to his interest. "What I plan to do," I said slowly, "is protect my son and myself from a husband who's been lying to me for months, while planning to abandon us." "Abandon is a strong word," Derek replied evenly. "I never intended to abandon Ethan. He's my son, and I want to be part of his life regardless of what happens between you and me." The distinction felt both legally significant and emotionally hollow. Derek was already positioning himself as the reasonable parent who wanted joint custody, rather than the deceiving spouse who'd planned to destabilize his family during his wife's most vulnerable period. What about Vanessa? I asked. How does she fit into your plans for being part of Ethan's life? Derek's composure cracked slightly, revealing a flash of the guilt and conflict I'd glimpsed in recent weeks. Vanessa and I developed feelings for each other that neither of us intended. It doesn't change my commitment to being a good father to Ethan. The clinical language couldn't disguise the fundamental betrayal at the heart of Derek's explanation. He'd chosen to pursue a relationship with another woman while his wife was pregnant and recovering from childbirth, then tried to frame his deception as an unfortunate accident rather than a series of deliberate choices. When were you planning to tell me? When were you going to stop lying about client emergencies and business trips? Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, apparently unprepared for such direct questioning. I was waiting for you to recover fully from the surgery. I didn't want to stress you while you were still healing and adjusting to motherhood. How considerate, I said, allowing sarcasm to creep into my voice. You were protecting me by continuing to lie and cheat while I took care of your newborn son. Rachel, I know how this looks, but the situation is more complicated than you understand. Vanessa and I didn't plan for this to happen. We tried to fight it, but sometimes feelings develop beyond our control. The self-serving narrative Derek was constructing painted him as a victim of uncontrollable passion, rather than someone who'd made calculated choices to deceive his family. I wondered if he'd convinced himself that his affair was somehow inevitable rather than a deliberate betrayal of his marriage vows. How long? I asked. How long have you been sleeping with her? Derek hesitated, clearly weighing how much truth he could afford to reveal. 8 months, he finally admitted. It started as a professional relationship, but it evolved into something more personal. 8 months meant the affair had begun during my second trimester, while I was buying baby clothes and preparing our home for Ethan's arrival. Derek had been building an intimate relationship with another woman while helping me choose paint colors for the nursery and discussing names for our unborn child. Were you planning to leave me? I asked bluntly. I was planning to ask for a separation, Derek said carefully. I thought we could work out custody arrangements that would be fair to everyone involved, including Ethan. The euphemistic language couldn't hide Derek's intention to end our marriage on terms that benefited him. A separation would allow him to continue his relationship with Vanessa while maintaining legal ties that might complicate any divorce settlement I pursued. And if I refused to agree to this separation, Derek's expression hardened slightly, revealing the calculating mindset beneath his reasonable facade. Then we'd need to involve lawyers and work through the courts, but I hoped we could handle this civilly, without unnecessary drama or expense. The implication was clear. Derek preferred that I accept his terms voluntarily, rather than force him to fight for what he wanted through legal proceedings. He was offering me the illusion of choice while making it clear that resistance would be costly and contentious. I've already involved a lawyer, I said quietly, watching Derek's face for his reaction. Shock replaced his careful composure, followed quickly by what looked like anger and calculation. When? Monday. Jonathan Hayes is representing. Derek's familiarity with the name was obvious from his expression. Hayes had clearly handled cases involving Derek's business associates or competitors, which meant Derek understood exactly how formidable an opponent he would be facing. You've been planning this, Derek said, his tone shifting from reasonable to accusatory. You've been investigating me and preparing legal action while pretending to be the unsuspecting wife. I've been protecting myself and my son from a husband who was planning to ambush me while I was still recovering from surgery, I corrected. Everything I've done has been in response to your deception. Derek stood abruptly, beginning to pace the kitchen with agitated energy. The calm negotiator was disappearing, replaced by someone who realized his carefully laid plans had been disrupted by an opponent he'd underestimated. What do you want, Rachel? What's your endgame here? The question revealed Derek's transactional approach to our marriage's dissolution. He was treating our relationship like a business deal that had gone bad, looking for ways to minimize his losses and maximize his advantages in the final settlement. I want primary custody of Ethan, child support that reflects your actual income, including business assets, and a fair division of all marital property, I said,
reciting the demands Hayes had coached me to present. I also want you to move out of this house immediately. Derek's pacing stopped abruptly. You can't kick me out of my own house. It's our house, and Hayes says I have grounds for exclusive use while the divorce is pending, especially given your affair and the fact that I'm the primary caregiver for a nursing infant.
The legal terminology felt foreign in my mouth, but it had the desired effect of demonstrating that I'd received professional advice about my rights and options. Derek could no longer assume that I would accept whatever terms he chose to offer. "This is insane," Derek muttered, running his hands through his hair in the gesture I'd learned to recognize as his response to stress. "We can work this out reasonably without destroying each other in court. You destroyed our marriage when you decided to cheat on your pregnant wife," I replied firmly. "I'm just responding to choices you already made." Derek's phone buzzed with an incoming call, and I saw Vanessa's name on the screen. He declined the call immediately, but the interruption reminded both of us that there was a third person involved in this confrontation. Someone whose interests might not align perfectly with Derek's. "Does she know about this conversation?" I asked. "Does Vanessa know that you're being divorced and investigated?" "She knows the situation is complicated," Derek said evasively. "Does she know that you told her you were planning to leave me weeks ago, but you're now trying to negotiate a separation instead?" Derek's expression revealed that Vanessa might be applying her own pressure for Derek to finalize his divorce quickly. The other woman wanted their relationship to move out of the shadows, while Derek was discovering that extracting himself from his marriage would be more expensive and contentious than he'd anticipated. The balance of power in the room had shifted fundamentally from the beginning of our conversation. Derek had expected to confront me with evidence of my investigation and to negotiate from a position of strength. Instead, he was learning that I'd been preparing for this confrontation more thoroughly than he'd realized. "I want you to pack some clothes and stay somewhere else tonight," I said, pressing my advantage. "We can arrange a schedule for you to see Ethan, but I need space to think about what comes next." "You can't keep me from my son," Derek protested. "I'm not keeping you from Ethan. I'm asking you to respect my need for space while we figure out how to handle this situation. Unless you'd prefer that I call Jonathan Hayes and have him file for an emergency restraining order." The threat was mostly bluff, but Derek didn't know the limitations of what I could legally demand. His uncertainty worked in my favor, creating leverage I could use to establish boundaries while the formal legal process unfolded. Derek gathered some clothes and personal items with the mechanical efficiency of someone in shock. The confident man who'd been juggling two relationships for months had been replaced by someone who realized his control over the situation was slipping away. "This doesn't have to be adversarial, Rachel," Derek said as he prepared to leave. "We both want what's best for Ethan." "What's best for Ethan is honesty and stability," I replied. "Two things you've failed to provide." After Derek left, the house felt simultaneously empty and liberated. For the first time in weeks, I could relax without monitoring every phone call and text message, without analyzing Derek's expressions for signs of deception. The confrontation had been exhausting but necessary, establishing new ground rules for our interaction while the divorce proceeded. I called Jonathan Hayes to report the encounter and confirm that Derek now knew about my legal representation. "This actually works in our favor," Hayes assured me. "Now he knows you're serious about protecting your interests, which might make him more willing to negotiate reasonably rather than try to manipulate you." That evening, alone with Ethan in the house Derek and I had chosen together, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my son's birth. Peace. The uncertainty and self-doubt that had plagued me for weeks had been replaced by clear determination, and the knowledge that I was taking control of my own destiny. Derek's affair had ended our marriage, but it had also liberated me from the illusion that I needed to accept whatever treatment he chose to give me. I was no longer the passive victim of his deception, but an active participant in shaping my future and Ethan. The phone rang twice that evening with calls from Derek, but I let them go to voicemail. I wasn't ready for more negotiations or explanation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions, but tonight belonged to me and my son, free from the weight of Derek's lies and the exhausting effort of pretending I believed them. As I prepared for bed, I realized that the woman who had driven to the hospital in labor just 4 weeks earlier no longer existed. Derek's betrayal had forced me to become someone stronger, someone capable of fighting for what mattered most. The transformation was painful but necessary, and I was grateful for the strength I'd discovered within myself. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of our confrontation, but I was no longer afraid of Derek's plans or his attempts to manipulate the situation to his advantage. I had my own plans now, my own lawyer, and my own determination to build a better future for Ethan and myself. The divorce proceedings unfolded over 6 months with the methodical precision of a carefully orchestrated legal symphony. Derek's initial attempts at negotiation quickly dissolved into aggressive posturing when he realized I wouldn't accept the minimal settlement he'd originally envisioned. His team of attorneys, led by Portland's most expensive family law firm, painted me as a vindictive wife who was using our son as leverage for financial gain. Jonathan Hayes countered with devastating effectiveness, presenting evidence of Derek's systematic deception and asset concealment that painted a very different picture. The forensic accounting Hayes had commissioned revealed that Derek had been transferring business profits to hidden accounts for over a year, long before his affair with Vanessa had begun. The financial manipulation suggested premeditation that went far beyond a simple extramarital relationship. "Your husband wasn't just planning to leave you," Hayes explained during one of our strategy meetings. "He was planning to impoverish you in the process. These transfers weren't random business decisions. They were carefully calculated moves to protect his wealth from any future divorce settlement." The discovery of Derek's financial scheming transformed my anger into something colder and more focused. This wasn't just about infidelity or broken marriage vows. Derek had been systematically stealing from our family's future while I planned for our son's arrival, believing we were building security together. Vanessa Cole became an unexpected ally in my legal battle, though not by choice. When Derek's attorneys tried to minimize the significance of their relationship, claiming it was a brief indiscretion rather than a serious affair, Vanessa's own lawyer contacted Hayes with information that contradicted Derek's narrative. "She's furious," Hayes reported after speaking with Vanessa's representation. "Derek apparently promised her that his divorce would be quick and amicable, that his wife would accept a reasonable settlement without prolonged litigation. Now Vanessa realizes she's been involved with a man who was lying to everyone in his life, including her." Vanessa's testimony proved devastating to Derek's credibility. She described in detail how Derek had discussed his plans to minimize my financial settlement, how he'd bragged about hiding business assets, and how he'd characterized me as a naive woman who wouldn't have the sophistication to challenge his version of our family's finance. The most damaging revelation came when Vanessa produced text messages in which Derek had calculated exactly how little child support he could legally pay while maintaining his current lifestyle. He'd researched Oregon's minimum requirements and planned to structure his income to fall within the lowest possible brackets, regardless of his actual earning capacity. Derek's reaction to Vanessa's cooperation with my legal team was swift and vicious. He attempted to discredit her testimony by claiming she was a vindictive ex-lover, seeking revenge, but the evidence was too comprehensive and detailed to dismiss. Phone records, financial transactions, and email communications all supported her account of Derek's premeditated deception. The custody evaluation proved equally favorable to my case. Dr. Sandra Mitchell, the court-appointed child psychologist, spent weeks observing Derek's interactions with Ethan and documenting his involvement in our son's daily care. Her report noted Derek's superficial engagement with parenting responsibilities and his tendency to treat childcare as a performance rather than genuine nurturing. Mr. Pemberton demonstrates love for his son, but lacks understanding of infant developmental needs, Mitchell wrote in her official assessment. His interactions appear scripted rather than intuitive, suggesting limited experience with hands-on parenting despite living in the same household as the child. The evaluation also documented Derek's continued relationship with Vanessa during the divorce proceedings, including overnight visits that occurred during his scheduled time with Ethan. Mitchell expressed concern about introducing a newborn to multiple caregivers and unstable relationship dynamics during crucial early bonding periods. Marcus Sterling's testimony provided the final blow to Derek's case. Under oath, Derek's business partner revealed the true scope of their real estate company's profits, and Derek's attempts to restructure their partnership agreement to hide his income from divorce proceedings. Marcus, who had apparently grown uncomfortable with Derek's deception, produced financial records that contradicted everything Derek had claimed about his earning capacity. "I told Derek this was wrong," Marcus testified during his deposition. "I told him that hiding money from his wife while she was having his baby was morally bankrupt. But Derek said she wouldn't understand business finances and would accept whatever settlement he offered." The revelation of Derek's contempt for my intelligence and financial sophistication stung more than his infidelity. He'd assumed I was too naive or dependent to challenge his version of our family's assets, too grateful for any settlement to demand what I was legally entitled to receive. Judge Patricia Reynolds, who presided over our case, made her displeasure with Derek's behavior clear during the final hearing. "This court has rarely seen such systematic deception in marital asset concealment," she stated from the bench. "Mr. Pemberton's actions demonstrate a calculated disregard for his family's welfare that extends far beyond marital infidelity." The final settlement exceeded even Jonathan Hayes's optimistic projection. I received primary custody of Ethan with Derek granted supervised visitation until Ethan turned 3, after which more flexible arrangements could be reconsidered. The financial award included 65% of all marital assets, including Derek's share of the real estate business, plus monthly child support calculated on Derek's actual earning capacity rather than his declared income. Most significantly, Judge Reynolds ordered Derek to pay my legal fees and awarded me exclusive ownership of our Oak Ridge house. Mrs. Pemberton's legal expenses were necessitated by Mr. Pemberton's deliberate concealment of marital assets. The judge explained, "Justice requires that the deceiving party bear the cost of uncovering their own deception." Derek's face during the settlement announcement revealed the magnitude of his miscalculation. The confident man who'd planned to dictate the terms of our divorce had lost control of virtually every aspect of the proceeding. His attempts to manipulate the system had backfired spectacularly, leaving him with minimal custody, substantial financial obligations, and a reputation in the Millbrook business community that would take years to rebuild. The aftermath of our divorce brought unexpected freedom and opportunities I'd never imagined during my marriage. With the financial security provided by the settlement, I enrolled in graduate school to complete the master's degree in early childhood education I'd abandoned when Derek and I got married. The irony wasn't lost on me that Derek's attempts to impoverish me had instead funded my return to academic life. Ethan thrived in the stable environment we created together. Without the constant tension of Derek's deception poisoning our home, I found genuine joy in motherhood that had been impossible during those early weeks of confusion and betrayal. My son's personality began to emerge as we established routines based on his needs, rather than Derek's convenience. Derek's relationship with Vanessa disintegrated within months of our divorce finalization. The financial pressure of his settlement obligations, combined with the public humiliation of losing so decisively in court, apparently strained their connection beyond repair. Vanessa moved to Seattle for a new job, leaving Derek to rebuild his life alone in a community where everyone knew the details of his spectacular legal defeat. Marcus Sterling bought out Derek's share of their real estate business at court-ordered valuation, effectively ending Derek's career in Millbrook's tight-knit commercial community. Derek eventually moved to Eugene, where he took a sales position with a larger firm that offered anonymity along with significantly reduced income and status. My relationship with Claire deepened during the divorce proceedings as I finally shared the full extent of Derek's deception. Her initial shock gave way to fierce support and advocacy that helped me navigate the emotional challenges of single motherhood while pursuing my education. "I always sensed something wasn't right about Derek," Claire admitted during one of our regular coffee meetings. "He was charming and successful, but there was something performative about his personality, like he was always playing a role rather than being authentic." Nicole Rodriguez, my college friend who had maintained polite skepticism about Derek throughout our marriage, became an invaluable source of practical support and emotional grounding. Her own experience as a single mother provided guidance about balancing academic demands with parenting responsibility. "You're a completely different person now," Nicole observed during Ethan's first birthday party,
which we celebrated in the backyard of the house Derek had tried to take from us. More confident, more grounded, more genuinely happy than I ever saw you during your marriage. The observation prompted reflection about the woman I'd been during my relationship with Derek versus the person I'd become since his departure. Derek's manipulation had been so gradual and subtle that I hadn't recognized how it had diminished my sense of self-worth and independence. The strength I'd discovered during our legal battle had revealed capabilities I'd forgotten I possessed. My graduate program in early childhood education led to an internship at Millbrook's Community Child Care Center, working with families facing challenges similar to what Ethan and I had experienced. The position combined my professional interests with personal mission to support other mothers navigating difficult transitions. One afternoon, while organizing educational materials for a workshop on family financial literacy, I received an unexpected visitor. Derek appeared in the childcare center's lobby. His appearance dramatically changed from the confident businessman I'd married. Weight loss had sharpened his features, and his clothing suggested significantly reduced circumstance. I wanted to see how Ethan was doing, Derek said quietly, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that might have been genuine remorse, and to apologize for how everything happened. I studied Derek's face, searching for signs of the manipulative personality that had characterized our marriage's final months. Instead, I saw someone who appeared genuinely humbled by the consequences of his choices. Ethan is thriving, I replied neutrally. He's walking now, saying a few words, developing his own personality. I made terrible choices, Derek continued. I hurt you and Ethan in ways that were inexcusable. I know I can't undo the damage, but I want you to know that I recognize how wrong I was. The apology felt sincere, but I'd learned to be skeptical of Derek's capacity for authentic communication. Too many conversations during our marriage had involved carefully constructed performances designed to achieve specific outcomes. Are you seeking increased visitation? I asked directly. No, Derek said quickly. I'm not ready to be the father Ethan deserves. Maybe someday, but right now I'm focused on rebuilding my life and understanding how I became someone capable of such deception. The admission surprised me with its apparent honesty. Derek had always struggled with accountability, preferring to blame circumstances or other people for his failures. This acknowledgement of personal responsibility seemed like genuine growth, though I remained cautious about trusting it completely. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said diplomatically. Ethan will always need a good father, whenever you're ready to be one. Derek nodded, and left without pressing for extended conversation or additional contact. The encounter felt like closure rather than the beginning of renewed conflict, though I remained vigilant about protecting the stability Ethan and I had worked so hard to establish. 2 years after our divorce, I graduated with my master's degree and accepted a position as coordinator of family services at a regional nonprofit organization. The work involved developing programs for single mothers, financial literacy education, and legal advocacy support. My own experience with Derek's deception had prepared me to recognize similar patterns in other relationships and help women protect themselves and their children. Ethan started preschool that fall confident and secure in ways that filled me with pride and gratitude. His vocabulary had expanded to include questions about why some children had daddies who lived with them while his daddy lived in a different city. I answered his questions honestly but age-appropriately, emphasizing that families came in many different configurations, and that the most important thing was being loved and safe. The house on Oak Ridge had been transformed from a space tainted by Derek's deception into a warm home filled with Ethan's artwork, my textbooks, and the comfortable clutter of a life being built with intention and authenticity. The mortgage payments, which had once seemed overwhelming, were easily manageable with my new salary and the child support Derek continued to pay with court-mandated regularity. On quiet evenings, after Ethan had been tucked into bed with stories and songs, I often reflected on the journey from that terrifying moment in the hospital when Derek's phone had revealed his betrayal. The woman who had discovered those text messages while recovering from surgery bore little resemblance to the person I'd become through the process of protecting my son and rebuilding my life. The transformation hadn't been easy or comfortable. Legal battles, financial uncertainty, and the emotional labor of single parenting had pushed me beyond limits I'd thought existed. But the strength I'd discovered in myself during those difficult months had become a permanent part of my character, a foundation of confidence that no future relationship could shake or undermine. Derek's deception had ended our marriage, but it had also liberated me from the illusion that security came from depending on someone else's choices rather than my own capability. The settlement money had funded my education, but the real wealth was the knowledge that I could protect my family and build the life I wanted through my own efforts and determination. Friends often asked if I regretted marrying Derek, given the pain his betrayal had caused, but I couldn't regret the relationship that had given me Ethan, whose presence filled every day with purpose and joy. Derek's lies had been devastating, but they had also revealed truths about my own strength that might have remained hidden in a marriage built on genuine trust and honesty. The phone that had started this journey, Derek's device displaying Vanessa's intimate messages while I held our newborn son, sat forgotten in a drawer somewhere in his Eugene apartment. But the courage I'd found to photograph those messages and seek legal protection had changed everything about my future. As I prepared for bed in the house Derek had tried to take from us, surrounded by evidence of the life Ethan and I had built together, I felt profound gratitude for the strength to fight back when someone tried to diminish my worth and steal my security. The battle had been worth winning, not just for the financial protection it provided, but for the knowledge that I would never again allow anyone to make me feel powerless in my own life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.